So a lot of what I do in helping founders is give them an opportunity to talk through that. And I give them usually very similar advice. Look, we have to build you a support network. Being a founder is surprisingly lonely. You can't tell your team that you were this close to not making payroll. You can't tell your client that you were this close to not making deadline on that thing you promised that they need for their clients. That's not a conversation for them.
Gerry, thanks for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Elijah. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And we have we probably have to address the elephant in the room, which is gray, but not so elephant, which is your friend who's in the room with you in case he makes some noises. Who else do you have with you in the room?
Yes, I share an office with an insane African gray parrot named Mercury. That was him. My children renamed him Jerkury, and they are correct.
He's a big fan of the podcast and interjecting.
He is. I will say something real quick about him. So he's a rescue bird. I've had him for now 5 or 6 years. But the person I got him from owned a construction company. So his favorite sounds are trucks backing up, heavy equipment, and I'm going to say colorful language. He will use said colorful language in 3 to 5 different voices, and sometimes will have entire conversations with himself in different voices. And my children won't come in my office when I'm not here anymore because he talks to them in different voices and creeps them out.
This sounds a little possessed, but at least you have someone keeping you company. Just a lot. Well, yeah. So we have the background on Mercury, but why don't you introduce yourself as well and give a little context as to who you are in this world?
Sure. My story, far less exciting. But my name is Gerry Gadoury. I'm a business owner, a founder, a recruiter, a salesperson, a business leader, and an author. I've been in this space for about, 25 years now. I started my career as a technical recruiter, moved from there to sales management, branch management. Then I did management consulting into technology services companies, which in the beginning was glorified sales and recruiter training, but evolved into management coaching and then really specifically founder coaching. And from there, or I should say really more as part of that, I took long-term contracts with companies in senior executive roles. So I was the president of Apicero, which is probably my single biggest success story. We took a company from 5 guys to a 9-digit acquisition in 5 years, from 5 employees to 2,500 with 9 offices in 3 countries. I was the COO of Prominent, which is a custom software development house. And then from there, I honestly got tired of making other people rich. So I started my own consulting company, Redbeard Solutions. And then out of that grew the book Destination Employer, which is designed to teach early stage companies how to consistently attract, recruit, and retain top talent. And we just launched our program to give a deeper dive into that subject for companies to be able to, again, do that on their own time, self-paced with all the accoutrements you expect of a self-paced program. And that's pretty much, what I've been doing, really focusing on those things for the marketplace.
So definitely a storied background. I don't know if Mercury takes the cake there. You definitely have quite the experience. I want to go all the way back, actually. So you talked about your start as technical recruiting, but we were talking before we started recording a bit about your experience even prior to that in the Marines. So I think I've worked with a few founders who are veterans, and I think that there's so many useful parallels between the training that you have in that structured type of environment and in the communication, in the leadership that you need to have in the military. You were sharing a few stories and kind of how you brought some of those principles forward with the teaching and coaching that you do. What is it about a classical or traditional military training that is so applicable to business and entrepreneurship?
There's a couple of things. So I'm a former United States Marine Corps sergeant. My technical specialty was signals intelligence and electronic warfare. So that technical piece is what led me ultimately to technology services and more specifically to cybersecurity. But the leadership side, the Marine Corps is renowned for its leadership, which is probably an episode all on its own. But the primary thing that really sets, I think, in my very biased opinion, veterans apart is understanding how much can be done in a day. Here we are 20 years later from my leaving the Marines, and I still get up at 5 in the morning. I'm still working by 6:37 in the morning, and it's not uncommon for me to be working at 9 or 10 at night. It just, when there's a job to be done, the military in particular, in general, the Marine Corps in specific, is really focused on mission accomplishment and getting things done. We don't really care about why something didn't happen. We care that it didn't. So that really translates well, especially into entrepreneurship and into small business, where you need to find ways to get things done. We used to joke in the Marines about the product acquisition department. I swear, whenever we'd go in the field, we have 80 to 85% of the things that we needed, and the expectation is we'd find the other 15 to 20%, which largely meant steal from other units. And that mentality of finding way, gosh, in the company now we call it the GSD, get shit done. But that
Yep.
mentality really translates well. It's an incredible experience.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. Again, these foundational experiences that you have then are able to kind of be brought forward into 25 years later. You're kind of leveraging that experience to teach other founders. I want to shift. So, talking a bit more about how you coach founders. There are kind of two sides that I want to explore with it. So, founders themselves, why does a founder need coaching? Right? Maybe let's start there. And then the other aspect is kind of the blend between founder, the human, versus founder, the identity that you associate with. But let's start first with, why do founders need coaching in the first place, and kind of how do you help them on that side?
A great question. The second half first, it's varied and it's very dependent on the person. But as a gross generalization, most founders come to their startup with a set of skills. The two most common that I see is they're a technologist and they've got a technical idea that they want, that they want to birth some type of a product or service or whatever. Or they're a salesperson and they've got the business idea and they need help on the technical side. Both of those people traditionally lack leadership skills. A technologist, again, gross generalization, just like our moms taught us never to do, but a technologist typically gets into technology because they like technology and want to make cool stuff, not because they love people.
Like building. They're the builder.
Exactly correct. A salesperson, all the skills that make you an incredible individual producing salesperson revolve around being productively selfish. And that's exactly the best way to be a horrible leader. So a lot of these salespeople, they're incredible producers, but they lack, and this is going to seem strange for a people-oriented business like sales, but they lack the interpersonal skills to pull other people up with them. So a lot of that coaching is about learning the strengths and weaknesses of that individual and helping them to fill in the gaps. Bleeding over to the second half of your question, again, gross generalization, but a lot of founders, and I include myself in this, are pretty high strung. We have to perform or other people are penalized. If I fail in my role, I can't make payroll. And that burden, that pressure is a lot to deal with. And having to be on stage all the time with our companies and externally with our clients, that's a lot of pressure. So a lot of what I do in helping founders is give them an opportunity to talk through that. And I give them usually very similar advice. Look, we have to build you a support network. Being a founder is surprisingly lonely. You can't tell your team that you were this close to not making payroll. You can't, that's not a conversation to have with them. You can't tell your client that you were this close to not making deadline on that thing you promised that they need for their clients. That's not a conversation for them. And you want a group of people that you can soundboard off of. A lot of the answers I give are answers that are common sense, but because that founder is this close to it, they can't see it. So I'm that 3 steps back that gives them the perspective they need.
Why is it that entrepreneurship is so glamorized in modern society?
Interesting question, a little bit of a difficult answer. I think part of it from an American perspective. So quick, funny related story. I was stationed in Scotland for 3 years. Scotland at that time, again, 25 years ago, it may be different now, but at that time, caste system is certainly too strong a perspective to mention, but there was a perception that the level your parents were at was roughly where you were going to be. So I say this, there was a popular restaurant there called Ruse Leap. Ruse Leap was an American-style burger joint owned by an Australian guy in Scotland. And the place was packed wall-to-wall every single night. And my friends and I went
with locals or with expats?
both. Pretty solid mix. And what passed for an American-style burger is certainly open to interpretation, for certain. But lest my tangent grow a tangent, let me finish this one. So, I got to know the owner because my friends and I went there quite a lot. In part, not because of the burgers, but because of the incredible beer selection. They used to have a Ruse Leap Around the World T-shirt that you could earn by drinking one of every beer. That was an experience. But anyway, we were talking one night about how packed it was and why did he never consider expanding. And I discovered that he owned the whole building, of which he used a tiny portion, and literally the space next to his was open. It was just a matter of removing a non-load bearing wall, painting and putting in more tables. And it just never really, he's like, my needs are met. And that mentality, again, at that time in that place in Scotland seemed to be pretty much the norm. But here in the United States, it's all about expansion. It's all about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. It's all about doing better than your parents did. And your parents take pride in you having a better life than they did. So I think that feeds part of it. The inverse, though, and this is the part I'll never understand. I challenge you to find a representation of an entrepreneur or successful business person in popular media that's not negative. Where best case scenario, the person is a lovable scamp or has borderline, what's the word I'm looking for? Autistic tendencies. You know, look at the popular shows, Billions, Silicon Valley. Going even further back, was it not Lie to Me? Gosh, Don Cheadle was the star of it. It's a management consulting company. It's wonderful, by
I'll
the way.
Have to check that out.
You need to. It's 10 out of 10. It's absolutely amazing. I'm drawing a blank, but he's totally dysfunctional in the show. So it's kind of a hard answer. I think it's because, again, it speaks to the American entrepreneurial spirit, but it's certainly not supported in popular media. That's for certain.
So given you work so much with founders, do you think that should we be holding up the pinnacle of entrepreneurship as the ideal? Or should it be kind of that, again, maybe it's changed, but the motif that you described of oh, my business serves my needs. It does enough. And I think this is also something that's coming into more and more of late with the silver tsunami of kind of this inheritance of the previous generation, or rather even the generation before that, kind of having these brick and mortar, these mom and pop businesses, and there's no one to necessarily take over these businesses because they are good enough, right? They've been run for 30 years. The baby boomers built them, and they're sustainable businesses, and they make a profit, and they maybe make a good living. And I've heard of a husband and a wife team that have been running companies or a company for 30 years, kind of doing headliner car manufacturing repairs and just very small things. But it is a business and it is enough to kind of service their needs. But there's this gap of no one's really interested in that business. Everyone's interested in tech and hyper growth and hyperscale and kind of more and more and more. So do you think in the work that you do with founders that founders should kind of focus a bit more on, well, let me do something that is good enough for my needs and carve out a business and have stability, but not go on this hyperscale journey? Or do you think that hyperscale journey is necessary, healthy, and it's, if somewhat manic depression and isolationism is part of the price to pay for this success and greatness, then damn it, it's worth it.
Yeah, well, you said a lot there, and I could probably talk for an hour on any aspect of it. I will say, from my view, the best answer is you need to do what's best for you. So I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. It's probably my primary branding platform. So I spend a lot of time there, and you'll see a lot of very self-serving. Here's a general rule of thumb. If a person quotes their Twitter with a picture of themselves, if that's the picture on their post, they're probably trying to sell a program, a course, or a book. But you'll see a lot of really self-serving advice. I'm not going to name names because I follow some of them and I appreciate their content, but they'll give advice like, if you'll work 40 hours a week for somebody else's dream, surely you'll work a half an hour a day for yours. Well, for many people, being an employee is what's best for them. They enjoy the stability of working for a company, and that's what's best for them. For many startup founders, they in that same vein and course of thought, they don't take the time to decide what they want their exit to look like. They don't take the time to understand what their end should look like. And if they did, I suspect many of them would say, would come to a story similar to what you described. It might not be brick and mortar. And I'm pretty tainted by doing predominantly work in tech, but I think that they would scale their dream to something that gives them the life that they want. So if, for example, if you're bootstrapped and you're not beholden to a VC that you sold your soul to in order for you to get that check to get started, and you can focus more on sustainable, profitable growth instead of the growth projections that they're forcing you to follow in order to get the next check that the way you design your company you need to have in order to continue to grow. If you are in that bootstrap category, you can make those choices on your own. Now, you may be in a space where that VC makes sense to you, and I probably shouldn't have teased them in that when I'm telling people to look at their own path more closely. But if you're in that place, then when you take the time to think about your exit first, to quote Dr. Stephen Covey in his incredible book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which I know it's an oldie and it's not an exciting read, but it's probably the most important business book ever written. I recommend it to everyone who ever asked me. I give it to every child in my life that graduates from high school. But when you begin with the end in mind and you can chart your path and you know what you're looking to achieve, those answers largely take care of themselves. When you grow for the sake of growing, or when you follow the herd instead of building a tight circle of people who know you well enough to understand what you're trying to achieve, then I think that becomes a harder question to answer, if that ramble made sense.
It does, and I love the Covey illusion, because I think that's principle number 2, or anyway, it doesn't matter. But beginning with the end in mind, it sounds so simple, and often I think people think that they do it, but in reality, taking some time down to write, document, just kind of define with clear terms, this is why I'm doing all these things. This is my goal. This is my objective. This is why I'm trying to go down this path. And then if the goal is to have stability in your life, or to make a certain amount so that you can support 2 kids and a significant other and buy a house or whatever it is, but having that clear goal, it gives so much clarity to the same exact things that you might be doing, but rather than doing them and wandering and not quite knowing why you're doing things, and did I get there? Did I not get there? Where the hell am I going? Just taking that little bit of time, mapping it out, and being intentional about where you're going and why you're going there completely transforms the journey itself.
100% agree. In setting aside the mental health piece, which obviously we should never do, that's critical, but just from a nuts and bolts perspective, if I know that my goal is to sell my company in 5 years, it isn't, but let's say it was. If I know my goal is to sell my company in 5 years, I'm going to make a certain set of decisions in the building and the structure of that organization. If I'm going to try to go public in 7 years, I'm going to build with a certain direction and intention. If I'm building a lifestyle business that's designed to be an ATM that I can maintain for the rest of my working life, I'm going to make, again, a certain set of decisions. And understanding that endpoint enables me to make those choices in an intelligent way. So going right back to Covey, it doesn't matter how fast you climb that ladder if you've got leaning against the wrong wall. So again, beginning with your end in mind, and you might decide 2 years in that you've changed your mind, you want to do something different. That's fine, because you can still make informed decisions on the new path.
Very much so. I want to go back to something you touched on, which was personal branding. Regardless of what path you are on within the bucket of entrepreneurship, how critical is it to have a personal brand, in your opinion, in today's era?
I've been blessed in that I've had a pretty great career. I have few regrets. There are 2, though, that really come to mind. One is not taking my professional network more seriously earlier in my career. The second is not intentionally building a platform earlier in my career. The bigger that you build your personal brand, especially, and not just the founder, but anybody in that early stage team, anyone either aspires ultimately to found their own company or is an early stage leader, if you're not building your brand, you're missing a huge opportunity. Your brand allows you to define how the marketplace sees you. So if you work on the people side of the business, as my companies do, it allows people to see what working with you would look like, what ideas you have, how you interact with your teams. From a sales perspective, it lets prospects and potential clients and existing clients see a little bit behind the curtain and how things are and work with you so they can make better decisions. And since you're building it, you can control what that look behind the curtain looks like. It also allows you to find those people, because again, part of building a brand is engaging with other thought leaders. It allows you to find people whose values and goals align with yours so you can build that network I keep talking about. The world is a different place when you've got 5 to 10 people that you become close to, that you're not competing against, who are in a similar stage company that you can bounce ideas off of. And the best way to find those is to create content and build a brand, and you'll find each other. You'll find yourself liking and sharing and commenting on posts because they're like, that dude's got my script. We're doing the same thing. And before you know it, you've got somebody, you're talking to about, pretty profound things.
Yeah, I would agree with you on the impact of a personal brand. I think there's been this past decade, maybe 14 years, maybe a little bit longer, of the idea of the influencer. And it kind of got a bad wrap around it of influencers are silly and it's just people posting vanity pictures on Instagram. And to a degree, that is true. But if you look at a broader spectrum of sales and personal branding, this is not something that's new. We've been doing this since a very early time of kind of building out your profile. And so we do this in high school when we're applying to college of, what extracurricular sports are you doing, or extracurricular activities and volunteering and your grades, right? These are all things that are markers of activities that you have done or things that you do to represent who you are and who you stand for in this world. And then the same thing when you're applying for jobs, your resume. Your resume is a little snapshot of who Gerry is and who you stand for and what you believe. And so the tools have changed, right? We're playing in this world where you can get a lot more granular, and you can have social media posts, and you have LinkedIn and Instagram and podcasts and all this additional mediums through which you can build this personal brand. But it's the same exact thing that we've been doing and using to sell one another since the dawn of time. Dating, right? I have more camels than you do, so therefore I'm more attractive, right? So it's the same type of thing that we've always been talking about, but the tools have changed. And so if you're not playing this kind of new arena, sure, you can do fine and it's okay. But the more influence you can have and the more clarity you can have around who you are and communicate that clearly to others, the more, like you said, you'll find your tribe and be able to do cool things with them.
100%. And you mentioned something I think bears expanding on. You talked about, influencers being silly. I think so. A couple things. Number one is authentic content. So the more that you put out authentic content where people can see a consistency across posts, a consistency across platforms, where it's clear that that's who you are, the more that you avoid that ugly brush. But here's an interesting thing. So I play a little bit in the digital marketing space because I help founders to build employer brands. I play a little bit in the social media marketing space for the same reason. I play in the recruiting space. A small part of my company is helping folks find, in-demand, hard-to-find talent, which is recruiting. I do quite a bit in the sales space. I both train salespeople and do selling and all that stuff. All 4 of those areas have a pretty negative view in the marketplace. And I think for a lot of the same reasons. Number one, all 4 of those things have an extremely low bar of entry. So if you want to start, if you were to turn on YouTube right now and say, type in how to make money, second biggest search platform in the world, YouTube, which is owned by the biggest search platform in the world, Google. You type in how to make money. Social media marketing is probably going to be near the top. And you're going to see some 20-year-old kid in a very clearly dingy apartment talking about how they made $10 million 15 minutes ago and $100 million yesterday. And it's completely unbelievable. But they're going to convince another person that watching their 1-hour video is all that they need to go open a social media marketing company. Same is true of digital marketing. Same is true of sales. Same is true of recruiting. All four of those have a bad rap for that reason. The second reason, all four of those are chronic overpromisers. If you sign with my digital marketing agency, I will quintuple. I'll get you. What's the most common, obviously AI generated email I get every day? I'll get you 10 new clients appointments this week. Yeah, sure you will. So there's that chronic overpromising. But the thing that's interesting in all four is when you find a person who can legitimately deliver in any of those areas, you glom onto them because they're the real thing, and what they can produce really is orders of magnitude higher. And if you look at those people's followings, if you look at those people's content, it's authentic, it's real. You get a feeling that if you were to interact with this person at a bar and they didn't know you knew who they were and you were drinking a beer with them, you get the same story as if you watched their YouTube channel or read their LinkedIn post or sat through one of their sales demos. And I think that's why influencers have such a bad rap, is for those reasons.
The disconnect between authenticity and what they're actually selling or their true motives, right?
Exactly.
And you see it time and time again. If people actually have skin in the game, actually have a reputation, and then show up as who they are, they don't have to be everyone to everything, right? Or everything to everyone, but they stand for what they know and they back it up with proof. Yeah, I think that's spot on.
Yeah, I think if you're in this any service space now, whether it's a technical service space, a physical service space, if you're in services, the question to ask your potential vendor who's in services is name a couple of your long-term relationships. I don't care about their actual name, but talk to me about how long you've worked with people. I've got folks that I've recruited for decades. I've got folks I've placed in roles for 20 years ago that I still talk to today. So the guys that sold Apicero started a VC fund, and whenever a new company starts, we all get the call, do you want a piece of this? Why? Because we all succeeded together. So
Yeah.
why wouldn't we do it again? Why wouldn't we get the band back together? If you're in services, like one of your companies, I believe, is a product as a service platform. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct.
So I'm not going to call you out. I'm not putting you on the spot, but I'd be willing to bet that you can measure relationships in years of companies that you work with. Or when you first started that company, I bet you had in your mind a list of people you're going to call first because you've already had success with them. That's how you measure any service business, in my opinion.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the more I do business, the more I realize everything comes back to relationships, because that's
Yes.
where trust is established. And if you're getting that cold email promising you 10 leads, or you catch up with someone that you've known for 15 years and they say, hey, I can get you one lead, who
Yep.
are you going to believe and who are you going to lean into?
Exactly.
You talked about personal branding and the recruiting aspect. I know that's something that you spend a lot of time in, around getting talent and then also retaining talent. Talk to me a bit about, where do founders typically break down in that process of attracting talent and finding people to bring into their ideally growing startup?
Yeah, it will surprise no one listening who's ever been within baseball throwing distance of a startup that founders have 25 hours to work to get done in any 24-hour day. So what typically happens with founders is when they start their startup, they do actually what I just described. They call everybody they know and they say, hey, do you want to join the company? Whoever makes sense, obviously, for that stage. And they typically don't start to take recruiting seriously until their professional network peters out. Up until that point, most founders typically are, who do I know, who they know, and all that stuff. And if I could wave a magic wand, I would ask them to read my book or one like it before they get there. Because when you look at building any successful company, there's four pieces on the people side of it. Obviously, the idea, the funding, all that stuff, that's different. But on the people side of it, there's four parts. There's attracting talent, there's recruiting talent, there's retaining talent, and there's leading talent. And the leading talent, we call it, the system that we propose is called the EFG Framework, Engage, Fulfill, and Grow. That goes through all three components: attract, recruit, retain. The attract piece is building your candidate attraction engine, going to the places where your ideal candidate is likely to be and developing a reputation for a place where people can 10x their career. So we call that becoming a destination employer. So think, if you're a business or finance consultant, think like McKinsey. If you're a technologist, Apple, or these days, OpenAI. If you're an academic, something like Harvard, a place where you know if you go there, your career's gonna explode. So you want to develop that reputation. How do you do that? You talk to your team, you build brands in the places where those types of folks are, and you start giving and creating content and engaging. That's attract. The recruit piece is, now that you've got the attention of those incredibly hard to find folks, how do you not screw it up? So the recruiting piece includes your internal interview process, your employee referral programs, your offer process. The interview stage is where the founder really adds huge value in the beginning, meaning that when the company's small, the attraction, even though we got done talking earlier about how it's not wholly healthy the way that we look at founders, but they still do carry a huge amount of weight. A founder can out-recruit anybody in their organization at the beginning. But once that organization gets to a certain size, they become a bottleneck that hurts recruiting. So the short version is the best interview process is the shortest one that your company needs to effectively qualify talent. And as the organization grows, you accomplish that by keeping that decision as low in the organization as it can competently be made. If you, as a founder of 5 people, aren't involved, you're making a mistake. If you, as a founder of an organization, has 1,000 people and you are involved, you're making a mistake because you flip from huge benefit.
I think that's a really interesting framework to kind of tap into as well. I wonder if it ties into the military, but the idea of taking every single decision and trying to have it made as low down the totem pole, maybe is, but as low down the decision tree as can be competently made. You obviously don't want to give it to the intern to make the decision on, who our new chief of staff is for X, Y, and Z role. But the concept still applies of where can you effectively make that decision, and it needs to naturally adapt and evolve as the group, the collective, grows in scale. You can't be making every decision as a founder. And that, like you said, becomes, I've seen it time and time and time again, a major bottleneck for the growth of an organization is that founder had that full control at the beginning. They had to. That's the only reason this entire entity exists. But over time, they need to let go, let go, let go. And you see this with a board, right? In theory, they should be letting go. There's still a big voice on the board, but they should bring in other people within the leadership team. Other leaders should be making decisions about things that founder, maybe they're really great at sales, but they don't know about product, or they don't know about recruiting, or some other area. And so it's a very helpful framework, I think, that you've mapped out of pushing that decision down as far as you can while making sure it's still competently made.
Yeah, there's a couple important reasons. Speed is the obvious one, but the secondary reason is you want to develop the leaders under you. And you do that with as low a stake a decision as possible. Not that hiring is low stake, mind you. But you get them to grow in that way. The other part, again, I talked about the EFG leadership framework, engage, fulfill, and grow. You want them to adopt that framework. And the way that you do that is by demonstrating it to them and then utilizing it through them. So engage, fulfill, grow. What that means is, as a leader, it's your job to engage with your team to make sure they feel heard and valued. You want to ensure that they're fulfilled by the job that they're doing and ideally the mission of your company. And you want to ensure that they're growing in their skills and responsibilities in their current role and ideally have a path in your organization. If you make sure those 3 things are hit, people don't leave. People don't leave until one of those 3 breaks. So if you're a software developer working for me, and I know through my recruiting process that your next step is to become an architect, and I map that out as 3 to 5 years in my organization, and you buy into that, part of my employer reviews are going to make sure that's on track. But if you get to that point where you're now ready for an architect role and I can't provide it for you, then that G is broken. Your reason to be with my organization is no longer valid. You can and frankly should leave. Now, at that point, I have a decision to make as a leader. I've gotten a little bit tangent. I'll wrap it up quick. I've got a decision to make as a leader. I can accept that the G is broken. You've got a better opportunity elsewhere. And I can make that a graceful and pleasant exit, which leaves the door open for you to boomerang back the next time that our goals align. It leaves the door open for you to offer referrals because you had a positive experience with me. It gives me potential entree into your new organization for client type stuff, for them to become a customer potentially, obviously, assuming that makes sense. it's a wholly positive thing. But very often leaders take it personally as though they're somehow, disloyal for doing that, and they make it ugly and they blow an opportunity. So yeah, so that's all the part of the 12 key elements that we go over in the book and the program, because there's nothing complicated about the people side of the business. But if you're not accustomed to thinking through that lens, to looking through your organization through the eyes of your team, you're going to make mistakes that in retrospect, you're going to be like, that was so obvious. But retrospect is an unhelpful guide, so yeah, so that's really why we do that.
One of the things that my co-founder and I say to each other quite frequently, more frequently than we would like, is just reflecting on how certain things that we know from undergrad school or advice that we've heard 100 times over, and we're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, of course that makes sense. Yes. And then something happens in your business and it's like, oh, now I really get it. And it sucks when you had the advice or you had the knowledge and you didn't necessarily execute it or deeply understand it enough to really make that change. However, that is part of the journey. Yes. Additionally, the more you can surround yourself with knowledge, people, advice, books, and learn from others. So maybe 9 times out of 10, you still go through the failure, the lesson, the learning, and you go through the painful way. But if you skip over one, that alone is worthwhile. And so the more you can surround yourself with that knowledge, the better off you'll be.
Yeah, the School of Hard Knocks has a difficult tuition, and better to utilize someone else's walk through those doors than your own. But to your point,
I have a diploma. I have a diploma up there on my wall that literally says "Went to the School of Hard Knocks." So
yes,
I know it.
Yes, no, but you bring up a great point. Sometimes you need to see it in the rear view, unfortunately. But that's really, you mentioned, one of the things I cover in coaching. That's one of the things that we talk about is when we're talking about what your plans are for the next month and next quarter. Occasionally, a coach can see those things and say, "Hey, have you thought through the secondary consequence of that decision?" And they say, "No, I have not." And then problem, disaster averted.
It's the same type of thing where, if you're talking with your friends about some problem going on in your life or your relationship with your spouse or whatever it is, that external party, sometimes it's so much easier to give advice to someone else and solve someone else's problem than your own. And so having a coach, having a support network, having someone to help look ahead and say, oh, does that really make sense? Did you think about it this way? And kind of shift your thinking, maybe kind of do a little course correction can be very helpful.
I guarantee that marriage counselors have marriage counselors, because when you're right up next to the problem, yes, you can't see it. You have no perspective.
That is very, very true. I would believe that. Gerry, I feel like we could go on all day, but to maybe close this out, if someone were to sign up for your program, or maybe if they were considering signing up for the program, like, what is the best piece of nugget of advice that you could give for free here? Share it, just kind of showcase what that platform is about and how it helps someone.
Sure. So if you're an early stage company, a small business, a startup, anywhere from like 10 to 100 people, everything you do is about maximizing the effectiveness of your team, whether it's getting them to stay longer, whether it's being more productive while they're with you. And the way that you do that is to look at your company through their eyes and try to align their goals to your goals. And the more effective you are, the longer they're going to stay, the harder they're going to work, because your success becomes theirs. If you do nothing else, if you never hear my name again, if you do that one thing, I promise you, it'll increase the likelihood of your success. And frankly, it's going to make you feel better getting there. Because when I know, use our example from earlier that you're a sales guy hired, that this is helping you build your house or buy your house, when we get there, even though it's your success, it still feels a little bit like I was a part of it. And that's a great feeling. It's a great feeling.
Having aligned incentives and deeply connecting and understanding what motivates people is a powerful, powerful way to build together.
100%.
Gerry, if people want to connect with you, learn more about your book, your program, your coaching, all the things that you do, where should they go to find out more about you?
I'm the easiest person in the world to find. You can just Google my name, but I'm on LinkedIn an embarrassing amount of time. You can see my book on Amazon, destinationemployer.co if you want to check out the program. My consulting company, Redbeard. I'm not a hard dude to find. Literally, I'm probably the easiest person in the world to find.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It was a great time.
Likewise. Take care.
Thanks.